We're going to work our way through the summer by going through the book of Hebrews. Now, the book of Hebrews is a book that often, some people, it's one of the lesser read books of the New Testament. And I suppose that's because, in some ways, some people get lost in it. There's so many allusions to the Old Testament and the tabernacle and sacrificial worship and who's Melchizedek, and there's just some people just kind of get lost in all of that and don't read it as much. There are a lot of questions around the book of Hebrews. Authorship is not clear. We don't really know who it was. Does it sound like it was written by Paul? It's a whole different style of writing. And there have been theologians over the years that have had a problem with one issue or another in the book of Hebrews. But the book of Hebrews lifts up the centrality and the superiority of Jesus Christ. And that's really what we want to do over the course of this summer, is to be holding on to Jesus. We really do need to hold fast to him. Now, there's nobody like you. There is nobody. Each one of you are absolutely unique. And whenever you come to any meeting or event, or every time you come to the table, you bring your own ambitions and your opinions and your abilities. The downside of that is every time you come to the table, you bring your own ambitions and opinions and abilities. The reality is that the things that make us unique and actually help set us apart with certain people are the very things that will set us at differences with other people. And we all have that. I just saw a little story on the internet, and you may have heard this before, about a guy who was walking across a bridge, and he saw someone standing at the railing, and they were about to jump to their death. And so, trying to talk them down, he yelled to them, and this is the conversation that unfolded. He yelled, "Stop, don't do it." And they yelled back, "Why not? Why shouldn't I?" He said, "Because there's so much to live for." He said, "Like what?" "Well, are you a Christian or an atheist?" "A Christian." "Me too." Are you Protestant or Catholic?" He said, "I'm Protestant." "Well, me too." "What denomination?" He said, "Baptist." "Me too." "Are you American Baptist or Southern Baptist?" "American Baptist." "Me too." "Are you conservative American Baptist or are you a liberal American Baptist?" "A conservative American Baptist." "Well, me too." "Are you with the American Baptist Churches Great Rivers region or the American Baptist Churches of Chicago?" "With the American Baptist Churches of the Great Rivers region." He said, "Wow, me too." "Are you American Baptist Churches of the Great Rivers region, New Hampshire Confession of Faith, 1833? Or are you American Baptist Churches of the Great Rivers region, Confession of Faith, 1853? He says, "I'm American Baptist Churches of the Great Rivers region, New Hampshire Confession of Faith, 1853. And I said, "Die, you heretic," and shoved him on over. Many times, with everything we have in common, there are those differences that we say, "Wait a minute." And I don't know whether that story is really funny or if it's tragic, that there's so many differences between groups of Christians. Jesus himself said, "Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and every city, every house that's divided against itself will not stand." Jesus isn't referring there just to your house, though he is. And he's not referring just to a nation, though it's absolutely true for a nation as well. But Jesus is speaking specifically about his house. If you read it in context, he's talking about his family, his church. It's not really easy to keep any group of people all on the same page, to keep us all unified in our mission. I think one of the prerequisites that we have, if we're going to really change the world, just beginning with the world in which we live, is leveraging what little bit we have in agreement, what we have in common. And it should be the most important thing. And to keep us on that mission with joy, enough joy that we can overcome the things that are going to pull us apart, the things that are going to cause us to fight with each other and be angry with each other and all of that. We are so different. We really need to be committed to something in common. And so what is it that unites us? What is it that unites the church? What can we all hold on to? With all of our differences, what can we hold fast to? Well, the writer of Hebrews, he reminds us it's not what holds us together, it is who holds us together. No matter what your preference is in music or any particular beliefs, or whether you have particular feelings about church government or church membership or church money or whatever your issues are, with all of that, we all follow the same Jesus. If we can keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, understanding him, listening to him, following him, that's really what this is all about. And we're going to find that the book of Hebrews is about Jesus' excellence, his unsurpassed preeminence. He's better than any religion. He's better than any other means of redemption. Now, the group to which this letter was written was being tempted to settle for less than the best. We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 1, if you want to turn there. And we're going to find that the group that this letter is written to, they're being tempted to settle for less than the best. They're being tempted to go back. The title of the book, which is not really in the book itself, but has been given to the book because it's apparently written to Hebrew believers. These are Jewish people who have given their lives to Jesus, who have come to Jesus to believe. And you're going to find that kind of as we work through the book, that they're going through persecution. They're considering going back to their old Jewish ways. The message of Hebrews is, don't do that, because Jesus is the best. He is the only authentic, true way. Now, you have to understand the Hebrews that he's writing to are second-generation Christians. They grew the same way, all the church grew. We are second-generation Christians. We have learned about Christ through someone in our oikos. We have learned about Christ through someone who was a part of, if you don't know what an oikos is, it's the Greek word used in the New Testament for a broader family. It is that network of people with whom you associate. It's the group with which you have influence. And so it's through those kinds of relationships, 8 to 15 people or so on the average, that Christ was being shared. That was how the gospel was really expanding. That's how the church has always grown. It's like these waves, these ripples, as believers spread one to another, and that expands and expands and expands. It started with Jesus. I mean, you can see it in the New Testament. The whole thing starts with Jesus, and then Jesus had his own oikos. That was a group of 12. And he met with those disciples over a 3-year period, and while he was relating to others, he had a very special influence and network with them. And all 12 of them, save one, there was one that did not work out as well, though that is apparently and stated that it's by the plan of the Father. But 11 of those 12, they gave their life for Jesus. It was a tremendous change for them. And each of those 12 also had their own oikos. They had a group that they influenced, their sphere of influence, so that by the time you get to the book of Acts, it says that there were 120 gathered in the upper room. And so by that time, that's 50 days later that you come to Pentecost. And then the church continues to expand and to expand because everyone has that group. And as you share with them, even if just 2 or 3, then they share with another 2 or 3 and another 2 or 3, and that influence begins to expand. So we don't know exactly how many Christians there were by the time you get to when this letter was written to the Hebrews. It was probably around 60 or earlier AD, because we know that in 70 AD the temple was destroyed. And so there seems to be continuing temple worship. He uses a present tense about sacrifices that are being offered and so forth in the temple. So that implies that it was before that time. We don't know how many thousands of Christians there may have been around the Mediterranean world by that time. But this is written to this kind of specific group of people. This is written to those who are going through this great persecution. Now, I know that some of you, when you come to Christ, you go through a certain amount of persecution. And it may not be for any religious reasons, but it may be. You may have come out of a religious background where your family feels like you're giving your life to Christ is kind of a slap in the face because you're not doing it their way, or you're insulting what they have taught you some way, or they don't understand. It's like you're trading religions. It's not like you're embracing a relationship with Jesus. And so some of us have gone through persecution. Imagine what it was for these Hebrew Christians. These Hebrew Christians, it may have been they were being persecuted by fellow Jews. Because their families back then, Jewish families, if you embraced this Messiah, they would proclaim you as dead. Some of them would have a funeral, we read. You were deceased. You were disowned. And so it may have been that they were considering going back to where it was just easier to be with their family and their friends. It's also possible in the Roman Empire, remember, Judaism was legal. In other words, it was a protected religion. Christianity was not. And so as that continued to grow, they may have very well have been persecuted by the Romans and said, whoa, what's this? If we go back to the old ways, it would be a lot better for us. But the book of Hebrews is really written to encourage them. Don't look back. See, Jesus is about the future. Jesus is much better than that. Jesus is the very best. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus and keep looking to where he is taking you in the future. So look in your Bible or on your tablet to your Bible or in your phone there where you have your Bible or however you've brought it with you this morning. And turn with me to Hebrews chapter 1. We're going to read the opening verses, just a few verses, and then we'll look at them very quickly here together. It sets the theme, really, for the entire book. Verse 1, the writer just jumps right straight in. No pleasantries. He said, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. And after making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. It really is interesting how he dives right in. You know, there's no greetings. This is your brother so-and-so writing to the churches in here and there and so forth. I mean, he just goes right to the point. He doesn't do a lot of things here, maybe because of the group to whom he's writing. I mean, think about the fact he doesn't have to defend God. Not to the Hebrews. He doesn't have to defend the fact that God has spoken. He just affirms with them. In the past, God has spoken. They knew God had spoken in all sorts of ways and times. They had record of that. God had spoken in dreams. God had spoken in visions. And God had spoken through prophets, particularly the prophets. And the Old Testament prophets were a special breed unto themselves. These were those who weren't just making suggestions. They were laying out ultimatums. This is the word of the Lord. And you can threaten my life, but you'd better hear what I'm saying because your life is at stake if you don't respond. They were on a mission. And so these prophets, one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other, a whole series of prophets were trying to communicate to them from God. But while the writer says there's great value in the ministry of all those Old Testament spokesmen and the Old Testament ways and the Old Testament methods, what they've really done is lead us now to something far better. Because now God has spoken through his Son. He has spoken through his Son. It is time to exchange that old revelatory succession of person after person after person, temporary person, temporary person, temporary person, for the permanent and authoritative voice. And that voice is the Son. You see, that's the first thing that this writer wants to establish. God has spoken to us through his Son. Job number one is to establish the Son's authority, who the Son is. You remember that's how Jesus addressed the disciples. He asked them that very question once. He said, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And the disciples told him, they say, well, some say Elijah, come back from the dead. Others say maybe John the Baptist, come back from the dead. Now, still others say maybe you're one of the other prophets. And then he puts it right in their lap. He says, but who do you say I am? I mean, that is the question. And Peter, he said, by inspiration, he said, you are the Son of the living God. You see, what you decide about this question, about Jesus, it is the most important question. That's going to tip the scale on everything else in your life. It is the fulcrum over which everything else teeters. Every decision, the course of your life is really based on this question. If you really believe that Jesus is just another teacher, if he's just another, like a Jewish Gandhi, if he's just, then what he's saying is a suggestion, it's a model, it's an example. But if he is the Son, if he's the Son of God, who died for the sins of the world and raised victoriously over death, who now reigns as the only king, I mean, that's a whole different story. That has different implications. And so I ask you, who do you think Jesus is? It's the most important answer you're going to give to any question you will ever be asked. Who do you think that Jesus is? I mean, there are all kinds of questions that abound around Christianity. Things people will want to question about. But you see, this one is the most important. It's not, how can a loving God allow people to suffer? How can God allow a tornado? How can God allow a hurricane? How can God allow people to go to hell? You see, the most important question is, who do you think he is? And if you get that settled right, all the other things begin to kind of fall into place. But without him, the rest is confusing. It's not that those questions are unimportant. But those questions are not half as important as this one is. Once you get this settled, you even have the answer to, what should I do with the rest of my life? Why am I living? What's the purpose of all this? Where am I going? This is the most important question. Who is the Son? Well, he gives us several ideas right here in these first 4 verses. The first thing is, he says the Son holds the consummate position in God's kingdom. Verse 2. He says, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, and through whom also he created the world. You see, in Jesus, the world is, in Jesus in particular, a son trumps everything. In Jesus' time, having a son trumped everything. Now, I really doubt that at that time they, were unhappy to have a daughter. But it was important to have a son, because the son would carry on the legacy. The son would carry on the family name. And so the son meant everything. A son here is appointed to the highest role. The aorist tense there is special. It means something that was a completed act in the past, and yet it continues throughout time. It continues to have effects in the present. This son has been appointed as the singular heir of everything of God. And he was appointed the heir of all things before anything was created, because he was part of the creation of the universe, it tells us here. Before the universe ever began, he was appointed as the heir. There's never been a point in time when the Son was not heir to the throne. And interestingly, the word there for world, it's not the word cosmos, from which we get the English word cosmos. It's not the physical world. There's another word, it's ainos, and it really means time and all things. It's all things as they relate to time. It's the whole universe and all dimensions that it's like 3 dimensions of time and expanse, and all of that is caught up in this particular word. He says the Son was appointed the heir of all things before he was the creator of all things. And when we look at the creation, the truth of the matter is we can't plumb the depths of it. I think some people were disappointed the more we look at space and the more we find that space just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. It makes the earth look so small. And yet it makes God awful big. God created this universe. The Son created this universe. And this truth, all truth is God's truth. I mean, truth is truth. I think I've told you before, one of my classes, some of my classes at Judson University are with criminal justice students. And they don't have any problems trying to argue about relativism. Because when I ask them, what do you believe in truth? They say absolutely. I mean, this person may have their opinion of how the accident happened. This person may have their opinion of how the accident happened. But what I'm looking for is what really happened. Something happened. That's the truth. You see, that's the way it is with God. And then the same way that the discipline of archaeology is continuing to support and verify the biblical record, the same is true with science. An honest look at the evidence supports the claims of the Bible. And so the Son is given this highest position over everything that we know and all the things that we don't know. We need to hold fast to him. Secondly, is that he's a complete reflection of what God is like. He's a complete reflection. Verse 3 says he is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature. And he upholds the universe by the word of his power. No prophet that I've ever heard of, no one that I know, nobody can actually claim that they created the universe. Nor can they claim to be the exact representation of God in every way. Now, sure, every one of us is a child of God. We have that opportunity to reflect the image of God in the world, but not like it's talking about here. In fact, the wording here, this is a very exact representation. It is the exact image, the very likeness of God's nature. The Son of God radiated God's light, his worthiness, his glory is his worthiness, revealing everything that's in the dark. You know that I love the study of language. You'll never guess the word that's used here for this imprint or this representation, this exact representation. It is the Greek word character, from which we get the English word character. It's who you really are. That's character. It's not who you put on to be. It's not how you're dressed to look. It's not the part that you play. It's you. That's your character. That's who you really are. And that's what Jesus is. The Son is the exact character, the exact imprint, the real thing. One commentator put it this way. He said, in literary terms, Jesus was the first edition issue of God. He's saying the Son of God is more than just a copy. He's more than just a master forgery. He's not just someone that looks a lot like God or reflects something of God. He is the original. He is the real character. And this Son isn't just sitting idly by, wishing someone would say something nice to him or suggest something for him to do. He didn't just create the world. It says here he didn't just let it wind down then after he created it, spinning out of control. He's not losing control of it. It's not wearing out or whatever. It says he not only creates, but he sustains. It is by his power that it maintains the form and the function of everything that exists until that time comes when the Bible tells us that he will make everything new, that it will have served its purpose. And so he has created everything, this Son, time and space, the whole bit. And he is upholding that, and he is sustaining that actively. And then finally, the Son completed the ultimate mission. Verse 3, after making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. The imagery there is just full of meaning. After he was done, he went home. It's like you do after work, hopefully, if you don't work at home. But you go to work, you get done with work, and you go home and sit down. It's essentially what Jesus did. He completed the work. The work was done. And then he went home and he sat at the right hand of God. So that he not only creates the world and sustains the world, but he also saves the world. He rescues the world. And I think that means the whole creation. I think all of the universe has been affected by human sin. I don't know exactly how, but in Romans it says the whole creation, the entire creation, groans for the redemption of the sons of God. I think that when Adam and Eve sinned, it kind of broke the whole system. And we don't even know in how many ways that is affecting us. We are all affected. And we can't do a thing about it. I mean, we can't even save ourselves, much less the universe. We tried. In fact, I'd say if you look across history, we've tried about everything. We've killed animals to try to pay for our sin. We've joined monasteries. We've given away everything we have. One story about a guy that sat on a pole for years. We had rules that God never even invented. Try to make up a whole system of our own to make us feel like we're doing better. I mean, we've tried everything. We ignore sin. We minimize sin. We hide from our sin. But the problem is it never goes away. I mean, you just can't get it off. Psalm 51, David said, "My sin is always before me." But that's why Jesus came. The Son has put an end to that. He came, he was born, he accomplished our purification, our cleansing when he died on the cross, and then resurrected, he has gone home, and he sat down at the right hand of Majesty on high. You know, the right hand was really important, particularly to the Hebrews, because in that day there was a whole pecking order. In every Jewish social event, there was a pecking order. The host would sit at the head of the table. And then the most important person there, other than the host, would sit at their right hand. And then the second most important person there would sit at their left hand. And the third most important person there would sit at their right hand, one person removed. And the fourth would sit their left hand, one person removed. And it would be right, left, left, right, left, until you got all the way to the end of the table. That's why Jesus said, when someone invites you to a wedding feast, don't take the place of honor. I mean, make sure you find your name tag. Because if you don't find where you're supposed to sit, you're going to find out, be very embarrassed that you're sitting in the wrong spot. You may remember two of the disciples and their mother coming to Jesus and saying, "Hey, you know, can one of us sit on your right? One of us sit on your left?" I mean, those are two seats of honor. That's where the Son is. He is in the seat of honor. The paragraph ends with verse 4. He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. In other words, Jesus is absolutely the very best. That's why this is all about holding fast. See, this is about being anchored in your life. I mean, I'll ask you that. What are you going to anchor your life to? What are you going to hold on to? Are you anchoring your life like they were to things in the past? I mean, are you gonna do it with things you think you've accomplished? Things you think you've learned? A reputation you've had some way? I mean, is that the way you're going to try to navigate your future? Are you going to keep moving into the future trying to look in the rearview mirror? I mean, you know how difficult that is? To say nothing of dangerous. I mean, in some ways it's foolish to be trying to drive forward while you're continually looking in the rearview mirror. The writer of the Hebrews is saying to them and to us, you need to quit looking in your rearview mirror. You need to quit thinking, oh, I want to go back, or I wish I could go back, or the way it used to be, or at least then I thought I knew what I was doing. We've got to move forward. And you can do that if you anchor yourself to your Savior. If you keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of your faith. You see, for these Hebrews, that should have been obvious. I mean, they've got angels, they've got prophets, and they've got the Son. And then the writer kind of lays out there, whose voice can you trust to be authoritative? Well, the Son, who inherits all things, whose power and wisdom created everything, who radiates God's glory, who connects directly with God's character, connects you with God's character, who fully paid the penalty for sin, who sits in the seat of honor and authority at the Father's right hand. Now let me ask you, to whom should we anchor your life? That's what he's asking them. And so I'd ask you the same today. I mean, what are you holding on to? My guess is it's not angels or prophets. I mean, that's not so much our story. But some of us are trying to hold on to money, or to hold on to being liked or admired. We're trying to hold on to being successful. Maybe we're trying to hold on to our spouse or your parents or your boss, or maybe you're trying to hold on to the government. The government will take care of me. We know better than that. I mean, a lot of us are anchored to our devices. Maybe you're holding on to your phone or to your tablet, your computers, your social media likes. I don't know. But I do know that none of it can compare with this. Trust me, Jesus doesn't call you back to the past. He calls you to the future. And so I would encourage you, and all the more so as we study this summer, hold fast to Jesus. Anchor yourself to him. Your life can't be in any more capable hands. And you can't be any more secure than when you're holding on to him. Let's bow.